All right, joined by the great David Murphy. He used to be my broadcast partner. He has since graduated from the Jared Sandler broadcasting school and doing bigger and better things with Fox Sports Southwest. But I always love when I'm able to chat with Murph. And Murph, we've been texting throughout this summer and this break from baseball. When's it going to come back? Is it going to come back? How much do you miss it? Oh, this and that. And it seems like we now have a light at the end of the tunnel. So I guess let's start from the beginning. What are your initial thoughts on just the return of baseball?
Oh man, so excited about it. I think the most frustrating part has been just the back and forth, and just I think in the world that we're living in right now, you take whatever you can get. So we're just excited to have any type of baseball. I think the difficult part has been, once the calendar hit June and everybody was expecting, all right, if we're gonna go by what everybody's saying and get these guys back in spring training or summer camp or whatever you want to call it by June 10th, we need to strike up some type of agreement soon. And that just kind of delayed. And I think as somebody who loves baseball and a former player, you want to see as many games as possible. So I don't even remember what at one point there was 114 games thrown out there, something like that. And then you're seeing in the 80s and you're hoping on the high end. But I think for now, 60 games, that's I'll take whatever I can get. Excited to see some baseball. I know it's not going to be a normal season, but when you love baseball, you just want to see these guys who are the best in the world go out there and compete and be entertained by it.
Murph, do you think I hate to think ahead or look ahead, but obviously the relationship between the players and the owners doesn't seem to be peachy, and there's a CBA that's expiring. I believe you had not retired yet when we were a year out from the most recent CBA, I think, which was that 2016 when that all came together?
I think it was the end of 2016.
Okay, so a year from that point, like what? I know this is a different circumstance. I guess I'm just curious, like what's your level of confidence that with now a year of runway leading up to that point that something can get solved? Because the optimist in me is saying or trying to believe that both sides got put in a negative light with the way this unfolded. And perhaps that's a wake-up call, like, hey, we can't let this happen next year. And it's also a more normal situation. This was a very abnormal situation. But I don't know. I guess What are your thoughts on the preparation now for the CBA that's expiring next year?
I guess if you want to think in a negative way and you want to think about how you can be fearful, you think about this season and what's happened. I think it's easy to think that it's only soured the relationship between the players and the owners. And then you hope that everything will go smoothly going into 2021. But then beyond that, you would hate to think that there would be any type of disruption in the season, which would end up being 2 out of 3 seasons for baseball. I mean, it would definitely hurt the game of baseball and just the fan base. And I feel like you could just go on and on about that. But at the same time, the way that you describe it as hopefully a wake-up call, hopefully the fact that they have had a lot of communication recently, and I know that that's probably about the task at hand and trying to figure out how that they can come back and play a season in 2020 and not necessarily the CBA. But I don't know, maybe fortunately or they've stumbled upon a way that they've communicated so much that will lead into good negotiations. But I think both sides know that the other side is going to play hardball, because it just seems like nobody's really willing to give in. And so hopefully just throughout all this process, something can be learned to where the collective bargaining agreement can can come to an early and easier agreement than expected when the time comes.
All right, so for this year, 60 games. I think so. Our friend Mike Bassick 2 years ago said that Major League Baseball should split the season into two halves, like minor league baseball, to increase the excitement, to increase the fan engagement because of how long the season is. And, I don't know whether that will ever be considered, but it is to me, I don't want this every year, but a 60-game season is really intriguing for a number of reasons. And let's just start with the fact that it is going to be an absolute race to the finish line, more in the form of a sprint than their typical marathon. And I think there's a lot of unique strategy that now comes into play. And we always talk about how sports, each league is a copycat league. I see what you do and I like it, so I'm going to try and implement it, with my team. But there really isn't a whole lot of a playbook for this upcoming season. So I'm curious, what are the things that you have thought about as far as this season is concerned from a strategy standpoint, or just elements that are going to be very different that could very much elevate a team or lead to a team's demise?
That's a really good question. I think, first of all, I'm excited at the fact that it's kind of like I read what Chris Woodward said the other day, and essentially you're looking at a season where you're going into August and you're tied for first place. And so I don't know, that's a cool way of thinking, that every team gets to focus and have that mindset, because, in the game that we see today, and so many teams are accused of tanking and not putting their best product on the field. So in that situation, how many teams do we see on August 1st that are already out of the race? Or even if they're not mathematically out of the race, logically, you look a few weeks down the road on August 1st and you're like, well, if this team continues to play the way that they're playing, they're definitely not going to be in the race. So I love the fact that we are going to have a great race down the stretch for all 30 teams. I'm curious to see how the extra inning situation works out with a runner on second base, starting in that situation to where we're going to eliminate, 20-inning games or 15-inning games, something like that, any really long games, because it seems like the traditionalists, they love seeing a good baseball game. I think the most common thing that you think about there is the 2018 World Series, when the Red Sox and the Dodgers played forever, and Max Muncy ended it with a walk-off home run. Ended up being a great game, but those, from inning 9 through inning whatever it is, and there's not a lot of action, and the game goes late, baseball has a tendency to lose some fans, especially in the modern generation here. So I'm interested to see how that goes, even though, like I said, I'm more of a traditionalist. I would love to see extra innings play out. And, and I know that I've read so much back and forth. I don't even know everything. I'm curious to see whether, and this isn't COVID related, this is just a new rule change, how it's going to work out with each pitcher having to face 3 hitters. It's going to be a different season, and now that we're forced to a situation where it's going to be different regardless because of the 60-game season, I'm interested to see whatever is thrown at these players and how they react, and just to see baseball as a sprint and not a marathon, and how they can go all out for 60 games and not have to they don't have to hold anything back.
There are two things that really fascinate me about this, Murph, and they both involve evaluation in the future. And the first thing is just from a player standpoint. Let's take a guy like Rugi. The question has not ever really been, can Rugi put together 60 great games? Because we've seen that each of the last few years. It's about 100 and we'll call it 40 games. More of a full season, what type of a player he is. And I think the sentiment after last season, when he started off miserably, but then ended the last really 2 months, he was one of the best second basemen in baseball just offensively. But you look at the big picture, and it wasn't that pretty, because for the first 3.5, 4 months, he was not very good. And so the question was, all right, are the Rangers going to ride with him, or do they need to cut ties? And this was going to be the year to make that determination. And for all teams, there are guys like Rugi, for which this year was supposed to be a significant year. So how do teams make those evaluations when they've got imminent financial decisions or strategic decisions? And then the second part is more just like from a team standpoint. You're the Rangers. You probably were going into this year thinking, all right, we'll let the season play out and dictate whether or not we're going to sell or buy or look towards the future or really like be aggressive on the now. And you don't need to make that commitment on April 1st. You got time to do that. The reality is the Rangers are not a favorite to win the division or make the playoffs. And from day one, they're going to have to make some decisions that are either geared towards going for it now or still balancing the idea that the best days are ahead of them. And I'm just curious how teams make those individual player evaluations in some of those now versus the future decisions. It's easy for the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Astros because we know they're going for it. But teams like the Rangers, they're kind of in the middle. They could make the playoffs. They could miss it. Do you pass up an opportunity on August 31st to move a starting pitcher for a really appealing prospect if the opportunity presents itself, even if you're one game back of a playoff spot? I think those are some of the decisions that really intrigue me as we get ready for the season.
Yeah, man, I feel like I could sit here and talk about that forever and really break it down because I don't know that I've really thought about that. I think off the top of my head, I understand it on both sides. I think the first thing I think about is that maybe they're not in an incredibly difficult situation from an evaluation standpoint with, if you take Rugi, so we know the player that he's been, and we know that we only have 60 games, so we could get the great Rugi for 60. We could get the poor Rugi for 60. We could get a mixture of both in there. But at the same time, are we expecting Rugi to be an all-talent, all-world, carry this team type of player? Or, I mean, as a second baseman, are we expecting him to maybe be, a 260, 270 hitter with, if you want to look on the conservative side or at least the positive side, maybe 25 home runs, that a guy that's going to help your franchise, but maybe not just be a guy that you put the offense on his back and he's going to carry him the way that Mike Trout carries the Angels. I think they're fortunate to be in a position with, say, another player like Willie Calhoun. So if Willie Calhoun came up last year and he performed well over 60 games, you might be going into the following season thinking, yeah, he played well, but it was only 60 games. We got to see Willie Calhoun do enough to where he's earned a starting spot, for this season. And maybe it would be more difficult for a guy like Nick Solak. He had a great season last year in limited time. And then if he has another great season this year in limited time, there's still maybe some question marks there saying, well, this season was only 60 games. But I think most of their players are locked into contracts where they don't need to make any major financial decisions. I think from the trade standpoint that you mentioned, that's the hardest thing, to evaluate talent, to evaluate where the team is, if they want to make some trades and figure out what exactly to do there. But I don't know off the top of my head that the Rangers are really in an incredibly challenging position because it's not like Josh Young hangs in the balance here or something like that. One of the really key pivotal players for the future hangs in the balance.
All right, I'm going to throw one hypothetical your way, and we'll end on this. It's August 31st, the morning of August 31st. The Rangers are 2 games up on a playoff spot, but there are 5 or 6 teams that are within, we'll say, 4 games. Mike Minor's having a good season. He's a free agent at the end of the year. And some contending team comes knocking on your door and is willing to give you a top 50 prospect and a top 150 prospect for Mike Minor. what do you do?
You didn't tell me that you're going to put me on the spot like this doing this.
And it doesn't have to be minor. I'm just saying, like, in general.
Yes.
You know what I mean.
My gut says, with a team, looking at the trend of baseball and how the trend is, you build a World Series team with young talent. I think the trend says that you trade him if you can get a top 50 and a top 150, because you are doing everything that you can as a franchise to get younger, to get good young talent, to load up that farm system. That's what all of these proven winners have done in the last 5 years or so. And that is completely that is a business-minded answer, and that is me thinking with my head and not necessarily my heart, because I think Mike Minor showed last year that he is an ideal ace for somebody who loves the Texas Rangers franchise and wants to see them win so badly. I want to see Mike Minor here toward the, every year until he's done playing. Between his stuff and his mindset, the leadership that he seems to have, with some young pitchers coming up, he is the ideal guy that we need. But I think if I have to make a decision on that, if I'm forced to make a decision, I say we might need to go young and trade him while we get the opportunity. What do you think?
Yeah, I lean that way as well. I just think that when spring training rolled around, the thought was, hey, maybe this team can compete for a playoff spot, maybe this team can sneak into the playoffs, and they should definitely compete for a playoff spot. But 2020 is not the year we're really going to, put our chips in the middle. And even though circumstances have changed, I think that mindset still needs to be considered if you were to get that type of deal. Now, I'm not moving Mike Minor just for the sake of moving Mike Minor, the way that we've seen in the past with free agents to be, especially if I've got a 2-game lead. But a 2-game lead on August 31st in a normal season, while it's not a lock that you hold on to it, you've at least got, at that point, 5 months of evidence to show you're that team. Whereas this year, you only have a month. And last year, the Seattle Mariners, after the first 2 weeks, were one of the best teams in Major League Baseball. And so I would hate to pass on that opportunity and then a week later find yourself 2 games out of a playoff spot with 4 teams ahead of you, and now this just isn't happening. So I hope the Rangers are in that position to make that decision. But my guess, ultimately, is that we're going to see less action leading up to the trade deadline because it's just going to be so confusing as to what to actually do, especially if the Blue Bloods are not in the lead. If you were to look on August 30th, 24 hours till the deadline, and the Astros, the Yankees, the Nationals, the Dodgers, they're all, where we think that they would be. That probably makes things a little easier than if, say, you've got the Rangers leading the West, and you've got the Chicago Cubs, who are not supposed to win the Central, leading the Central, and the Padres are leading the NL West. Because I think like the Dodgers, the Astros, those teams are going to be aggressive. They're going for it. They're building towards that, especially the Dodgers.
And there's other
– take a World Series however they can get it.
Right. And there's other variables involved too. I mean, the Rangers, say, hypothetically, if they're 2 games out and all these other teams are around them, where were the Rangers a week or 2 ago? Were they in an even better position and they're trending downward? Do we have an expectation that they're going to continue to trend downward? If we're going to trade away Mike Minor and obviously wanting to trade for young talent while at the same time trying to win, how is Lance Lynn pitching at the time? Has he been healthy? Has Corey Kluber shown that he's the Corey Kluber of old and that he can carry this pitching staff down the stretch, even if we trade away Mike Minor? is that, there's just way too many variables and so many other things where that's just, I think more than anything, that's a fun conversation to have right now instead of a serious one.
All right, last question, Murph, just because everyone still loves the home run. I think a 50 home run season prorated down to 60 games is like 18 and a half home runs. Does someone get to 20 home runs or no?
Does somebody get to 20 home runs? I think I'm going to say no. I think it's very possible. Players go on home run binges all the time. Maybe it's such a different scenario that, training, I don't know, maybe training camp is shorter. As hitters, we've always said that we think spring training should be way shorter. So maybe that's all they need is a few weeks to get their timing. Maybe they're going to be fine. But I'm going to say no. I'm going to say the leader is going to top out right around that, the upper teens.
All right, there you go. Murph, thanks so much for hanging out and looking forward to talking more baseball with you coming up here soon.
Yep, always enjoy it.